You know what I think? Pixar is the best at making computer animated motion picture films. I bet no one on YouTube ever said such a thing before. And the evidence shows. It's the many of its movies which earned the studio having the most admirations. Animation gave way to a whole new entertainment, and it became a great option for film. But it was Pixar who took it to the next level with computer graphics. And since its release of its first film, it was such a revolution that movie making could never be the same. Other studios came to be to do what Pixar is doing, and although some movies produced by them do turn out to be favorites, and few of which just so happens to be on the same performance level as the best of Pixar, many others are not as recommendable. Now, I'm considering only the studios that make 3D CGI films, but I'll still account DreamWorks Animation. And although all the films of Pixar are released by Disney, Disney has its own traditional animation studio for producing animated films and has been animating films way long before Pixar, and only some of its movies are 3D CGI. So that studio doesn't fall in the category. Back to the point, all these studios have the same mission to entertain with computer animation. But I think Pixar entertains with a mindfulness, and the elements they have to do that in such a way are worth describing. The animation is something many computer animated movies get right. But is it safe enough to say that it's the one thing all of Pixar movies get right? It's how you know the studio has people working their hardest. In a Pixar movie that is highly well liked, the character designs, the backgrounds, and the movements are all made to fit, make sense, and work right in that 3D environment. And it's all accomplished in a way that every viewer possible is appealed to. When the animators of Pixar do their work, they really deserve the credit. But let's not neglect that through the years, Pixar's method of animating has improved. You have to look very closely to notice it. And the studio has its own software to do it. I mean, it doesn't depend on other companies to animate and render their movies, and doubtlessly it never will. Not that it makes them any independent. Anyway, good animation makes a good movie. And I bet Pixar never fails at that. But it's not just about the animation. When Pixar makes its movies, there needs to be good enough stories. And so the storytelling is the biggest priority. Follows up aside, every story of theirs is original. Notice that there are no adaptations of anything from other media. Now, the people in the studio don't freestyle ideas. As soon as a concept is decided, they process it and structure a story based on it in a way that they think the targeted audience can be engaged in it throughout the film. I'm not sure if all CGI animation studios do this for their original films, but looking at how commended most of Pixar's films are, Pixar does it best. And the thing about the story of those films is, it's presented with the correct and careful use of the correct logic, and in a way that the story is brought to the audience, and the audience is brought through the story. When you're watching a great film of Pixar, you don't know what to expect. But because of that, you're willing to watch more. And when you're taken into learning something from such a movie, and in fact something that actually improves your life living, it's a natural thing, and it doesn't force you. As entertaining as the films can be, you just can't doubt that it's not without an intentional enforcement that influences the audience to think about themselves. And all this is just how you realize that of all CGI animation studios, it must be Pixar that has the best writers and directors. As for the films meant to follow up, the current writers do their best to keep the quality as consistent as the predecessors while implementing new stuff. At least in the respective franchises, the films never repeat stories. If anything to say about spin-off films, those are something intentionally different but don't affect the main films, so they work only in their own way. Telling a story matters the most to Pixar, and the films of Pixar succeed at their fullest when the studio gets the stories right. And in an animated movie, a story needs to have characters, and the developers of Pixar, no matter who they are, you should respect that they do their best to develop the characters to be watchable throughout the movies they appear in, on both the inside and the outside, to take the audience through the story. The characters who the audience is supposed to follow, they have as much depth as they need. As ideal as it ever gets, no character leaves the viewer to assess that the character is one-dimensional. There is always character development for whoever necessary and whenever necessary. And whichever of those characters who appear in follow-up films, whether they be sequels or prequels, are ensured that they are not converted or inverted back to square one like they were in the movies they were in before. And they don't start the same problems for the same reason. And whenever they do bring up problems, it is for different reasons. And when characters interact with each other, it's in a way that the audience is kept captivated. In the case of Spin-off, characters have different systems to be functioned in, but they still fit in their respective franchises. Bottom line, characters are conceived in a way that they are not difficult to look at. And it's one thing Pixar does with their movies, and audiences come to know the characters the way they're supposed to, as well as relate to and reflect on who they're supposed to. As for the people giving their voices to the characters, I think it works best as ever. Not everyone giving their voices are favorite actors and actresses of a lot of people, let alone popular celebrities. Even so, finding the right voice for each character is a challenge. Not to mention voices of some people like Brad Garrett and Bonnie Hunt being used in several movies for some reason. And wow, Pixar really has the biggest attachment to John Ratzenberger. But when their voices bring the characters to life, that's what counts. Characters are an important contribution to a story. In computer animated movies, Pixar is great at it. Now, when the people of Pixar produce films, I don't think they do it out of obsession for money and fame. It's true that many of the films produced are box office successes while having the highest Rotten Tomatoes scorings, and they got numerous awards to show for it. The Academy Awards is not an exception. It's kind of worth mentioning that of all CGI animation studios, and in fact of all animation studios in general, Pixar has the most Oscars for Best Animated Feature alone. It's really something that most of the years, one film of Pixar is literally the best animated film of its corresponding year. It's scarce to find people talking about an Oscar for Best Animated Feature being given to Brave, especially for what the animated films of that year were. But really, all the success and honors Pixar achieves for their many films being their best are for the positive impacts on the people who watch them from all the hard work and dedication put in them. Just by knowing that most of the films of the studio are the best the studio ever made, Pixar is among the best definite examples of an animation studio. It's not just an animation studio that entertains people, it's one that leaves a lot of impact on the people. There's a clarification I should make here. Computer animation works a lot, but it's not meant to make the other methods of animation obsolete. Those other kinds of animation still entertain and can be used for filmmaking, especially for the viewers to feel something, and with good reason. And there's no question in my mind that there actually are great studios for each different method of animation. Traditional 2D hand-drawn animation is not as easy to come across nowadays, but you'll still come across movies with that kind of animation from time to time. Certain enough, there are studios implementing it in their films, and Disney Animation would never drop it. And stop-motion animation has its satisfactions, and I find no studio doing it better than Aardman and Laika. But with 3D computer animation, I find that Pixar is the most promising of it. Now, Pixar started being its own company, but is now an official subsidiary of Disney, which has its benefits. All the same, Pixar still functions like its own company. One could and would argue that the movies of Pixar share similarities with those of Disney Animation just because those two studios and the movies they make are within the rights of Disney. Even if that's the case, Pixar is not a company that's trying to mimic another. So, although the animated films of Pixar and Disney Animation Studios have something in common, in a sense that the movies of both studios influence their audience in the most positive way possible. There are specific things that Disney Animation usually does, which some other CGI animation studios do as well, but that Pixar will never do. And that's what makes Pixar appropriately distinguished. When it comes to CGI animation studios, Pixar is the most recommended. With its method of animation that it decided to forever utilize and the notion to tell unique stories, many of the produced full-length feature films are the most inspiring that they can possibly be. All the films the studio ever produces could never be as many as those from DreamWorks Animation, but quality is of the best assurance, so I guess the amount of movies doesn't matter that much. I do realize that not all movies are as big a sensation, but seeing that there's still an audience for each movie, and yet each audience is quantitatively large, I don't see which of the movies do not have a rightful place in the world. If other animation studios that specialize in making computer animated films, including DreamWorks Animation, want to be as celebrated for their CGI movies, it's best advised that they learn something from Pixar. Those other studios can continue to do their own thing, but you can't expect the best from everything they do. So if there's any other CGI animation studio that you like more than Pixar, let alone the produced movies, that's your opinion of it. But don't persuade me to love all the movies from that studio. And if I have to give a little bit of further classification, how about this? Pixar is best in the English language market and especially for Hollywood. So there's that. Let me simply state that Pixar started making full-length feature films in the year I was born. So, of course, the movies since then were an influence to my childhood. These days, I'm not into watching every one of their films, especially for being in a time of how Pixar is animating human characters. Look at Luca turning red and Elio. But no complaints. Someone ought to say, this is a new era of Pixar for a different generation of people to grow up with. Most often, I'd be watching a follow-up of what I watched when I was younger. But I'll still decide which of something new to watch from the studio. This was a lot for me to say here. But everything I said is because of basically the lot of positive commentary people give about the movies, as well as their success with the critics, audience engagement, and abundant financial profits that I had seen, and not because I had better moments watching the movies of Pixar than those of other CGI animation studios. And even if I did, I'm not going to actually watch every single movie coming out of the studio, but it doesn't change the successful outcomes the studio got and will get. CGI animation studios that make computer animated movies do so to bring thoughts and imaginations to life, like other animation techniques do. Pixar may be the first to even start doing it, but even though it's a studio where every story for its movies is original, it does it with a well-suitable mentality, so that for the most part, the people who the movies are for are indeed as best resonated as possible. And that is why I think Pixar is the best computer animated movie maker of all. And I do acknowledge that Pixar did change over the years, especially for doing things beyond filmmaking. But no matter what the people in that studio do, movies is and will always be the best of their products. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Pixar for the movies that are a part of my life.